Coming up on this Wednesday edition of Newsline at Noon, Jordan and the US vow to step up their fight against Islamic State militants after they release a gruesome video showing a caged Jordanian pilot being burned to death. North Korea declares it will no longer seek dialogue with the US, accusing Washington of being bent on bringing it down. Plus, the defense chiefs of South Korea and China will meet this afternoon to discuss cooperation on North Korea and the establishment of a military hotline between Seoul and Beijing. These stories and more on Newsline at Noon.
It's noon Wednesday, February 4th here in Korea. Thanks for tuning in. Live from Seoul, I'm Eoh Jin-joo.
It's very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broome. And we start with the latest and most horrific act of murder yet by the extremist group that calls itself Islamic State. In a slickly produced video released online on Tuesday, IS militants burn a caged Jordanian pilot to death.
We will not be showing any part of the graphic video or the images, which have triggered a wave of condemnation from world leaders, including the King of Jordan, who has vowed revenge. Connie Lee has our top story.
Jordan has vowed punishment and revenge against Islamic State militants for the horrifically brutal death of pilot Muhath al-Qasasbeh. Jordan's King Abdullah, who briefly met with President Barack Obama at the White House Tuesday night, cut his U.S. trip short after hearing news of the murder. In a statement, King Abdullah hailed the pilot as a hero and called the terrorists cowardly.
We meet today with the great grief, despair, and anger following the death as a martyr of the heroic pilot Muhath al-Qasasbeh by the hands of the coward terrorists that behaved in an extremely wrong, criminal, and prejudicial manner that has nothing to do with Islam.
According to security officials in Jordan, some IS-linked militants jailed there will be executed in response at dawn on Wednesday Jordanian time. This includes Sajida al-Rishawi, the Iraqi woman who was offered up as a prisoner swap for the pilot. All this comes after the Islamic State released the extremely graphic video on Tuesday, which purportedly shows the pilot being burned alive inside a cage. As the authenticity of the video is being confirmed, President Obama called the militant group vicious and barbaric.
Whatever ideology they're operating off of, it's bankrupt. And this organization appears only interested in death and destruction.
In Jordan, citizens rallied in Kurak, the hometown of the pilot, on Tuesday night to express their anger.
I call on the government to execute Sajida al-Rishawi and the ones related to the Islamic terrorists in the Jordanian prisons.
26-year-old al-Qasasbeh was captured in December when his jet crashed in Syria during a bombing mission against IS. He leaves behind a wife, parents, and a nation brimming with grief and fury. Connie Lee, Arirang News.
North Korea says it sees no need to hold talks with the United States. The latest statement out of Pyongyang comes a matter of days after its invitation to a top U.S. diplomat was rejected by Washington. Hwang Seung-hee has the details.
North Korea has officially stated that it no longer intends to engage with the United States. In a statement released Wednesday, the National Defense Commission said the North Koreans are not willing to sit at the negotiating table with Washington when the latter seeks to bring it down. The commission, which is the regime's most powerful ruling body, is referring to a remark made by U.S. President Barack Obama in a recent YouTube interview.
And it is very hard to sustain that kind of brutal authoritarian regime in this modern world. Over time, you will see a regime like this collapse.
The commission went on to warn that the U.S. hostilities will be met with a just counteraction focused on inflicting the bitterest disasters upon the United States. North Korea may find itself cornered after the U.S. turned down a number of its offers. Pyongyang said last month that it was willing to suspend nuclear testing if joint military drills between the U.S. and South Korea were halted, an offer flatly rejected by Washington. North Korea invited Chief U.S. Envoy for North Korea Policy Sang Kim to Pyongyang last week, only to be turned down again. While the regime blames Washington for the current deadlock in dialogue, the U.S. has continuously insisted it remains open to talks. It says the only condition for resuming dialogue is for the North to demonstrate a willingness to give up its nuclear ambitions. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News.
Chinese Defense Minister Chang Wen-chun, who arrived in Seoul on Tuesday, is set to meet with his South Korean counterpart Han Min-gu this afternoon. Now, their talks will focus on a wide range of issues surrounding North Korea and security on the Korean Peninsula. Kim Hyun-bin reports.
Chinese Defense Minister Chang Chi-wan is in Seoul for a 3-day visit to hold talks with his South Korean counterpart Han Min-gu on Wednesday afternoon. Topping the agenda will be military and nuclear threats from Pyongyang and the current security situation on the peninsula. The defense ministry is also expected to call on China to put more pressure on Pyongyang to end its nuclear program. They will also discuss ways to further boost bilateral cooperation, including the establishment of a direct military hotline between the two ministers. The two countries have had hotlines between their navies and air forces since 2008 and have had discussions on setting one up for the defense ministers since 2007, but put it off as China was hesitant to risk its relations with North Korea. The communication channel is widely expected to enhance security on the Korean Peninsula and cooperation on North Korean threats, as the ministers will have direct access to each other. Chang is the third Chinese defense minister to visit South Korea. The last visit of a Chinese defense minister to Seoul was in 2006. Chang is scheduled to return to Beijing on Thursday. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
The top nuclear envoys from South Korea and China will meet in Beijing today for talks on efforts to denuclearize North Korea. Seoul's foreign ministry says Hwang Jung-kook and his Chinese counterpart Woo Da-wei will not only discuss ways to try and prevent North Korea from further developing its nuclear weapons program, but also talk about the possibility of reviving the stalled six-party denuclearization talks that were last held all the way back in 2008. The two envoys are going to be resuming where they left off after their last meeting last October. The meeting today follows trilateral talks in Tokyo last week among the nuclear envoys from South Korea, the US and Japan on bringing North Korea back to the six-party talks. North Korea is demanding the United Nations retract its resolution on the country's human rights record. The North state-run Korean Central News Agency said on Wednesday that North Korean Foreign Minister Lee Soo-yong sent a letter to the UN asking it to withdraw the adopted resolution, saying it's based on false information. North Korea has been demanding that its human rights records be expunged since last month, when kind of well-known North Korean defector Shin Dong-hyuk admitted that he falsified parts of his story about his terrible experiences in a prison camp. Lee has reportedly said Pyongyang is willing to talk about its human rights record when the UN withdraws its resolution.
Constitutional reform has been a political hot potato in Korea for a while now. Lawmakers haven't been able to move forward on the issue because President Park Geunhye, along with some ruling party lawmakers, have refused to even discuss it. So the opposition camp has set its own deadline to work towards this goal, and that's next year's general elections. Lee Ji-yoon reports.
Let the public decide whether or not Korea needs an amended constitution. That's what the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy's floor leader Woo Young-gun plans to do next year. Woo said Wednesday that he's looking to form a special committee this month to start rewriting the constitution. Then he plans to hold a national referendum on the amended constitution during next year's April general elections. The opposition camp is proposing to revise the law to limit the president's power over nominating members of the cabinet and the constitutional court. It's been criticizing the president for exerting, quote, emperor-like power under the constitution. Woo also said the committee will discuss all options, including a parliamentary cabinet system or a semi-presidential system to replace the current 5-year single-term presidency. By semi-presidential system, Woo means the prime minister would take the administrative power, and such power would be guaranteed by the legal system, not by the president. However, the opposition camp's efforts to move forward with the issue faces a tough road ahead. President Park Geunhye refuses to discuss the issue because she believes doing so would only shift the public's attention away from her economic initiatives, which she believes is a priority for the nation right now. The ruling party's new floor leader, Yoo Seung-min, also said Wednesday that they would need more time to discuss the issue because of contradicting views within the party. The current constitution was last revised in 1987 with the end of the country's military rule. Lee Ji-yoon, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, at the nation's top office, stung by slumping approval ratings, President Park Geunhye has announced plans to establish smoother coordination between the presidential office and her cabinet. The president hopes the move will reassure the public that she is listening to their concerns. Choi Sun reports.
Amid a public backlash over the government's tax policy revisions and its suspension of reforms to the National Health Insurance Program, President Park Geunhye called for greater coordination between the cabinet and her office.
새로 신설이 되는 정책 조정 협의회를 통해서 청와대와 내각 간의 사전 협의와 조율도 강화해 나가기를 바랍니다.
She emphasized that officials must clearly understand how a policy will affect the lives of the public through simulations and data analyses. Otherwise, she said, its purpose will eventually be defeated. The president did not, however, respond to bipartisan calls for administration to decide between increasing taxes to add welfare benefits or scaling down on welfare to avoid raising taxes. Earlier on Tuesday, ruling party leader Kim Moo-sung had heavily criticized President Park's election pledge to increase welfare without a tax hike.
A recent poll showed 65% of Korean people thought it would be impossible to expand welfare without raising taxes. I agree with them, and it would be wrong for a politician to deceive the public by promising more welfare without raising taxes.
Instead, Kim said the priority should be to review where the welfare budget is being spent and to seek ways to reduce expenses before opting to raise taxes. As for the government's backtracking on health insurance reforms, Kim vowed to initiate better communication between the party, government, and presidential office. Choi Yoo-sun, Arirang News.
The Korean government has taken another step towards building its envisioned creative economy. President Park Geunhye on this Wednesday launched an industrial complex in Chungcheongbuk-do province to develop the region into a hub for the nation's cosmetics firms, bio-industry and environmentally friendly energy. Korea's LG Group will be working closely with the complex to develop medical equipment and eco-friendly energy. LG and other related research centres will give the intellectual property rights for 29,000 items to small and mid-sized companies and startups. Now, after months and months of falling like a stone, global oil prices have rebounded significantly this week, jumping nearly 20% in the space of just 4 days. But is this a sustainable turnaround or merely a blip before the prices head south yet again? Eoh Jin-joo reports.
Global crude prices have risen every day for the last 4 days, with prices gaining 19% over the period. That marks the biggest advance since January 2009. U.S. benchmark Western Texas Intermediate crude prices hiked 7% on Tuesday to $53 a barrel, while Brent oil finished up almost 6% at around $58 a barrel. The price gain came on the back of major energy companies announcing plans to streamline operations as a means to stem plummeting oil prices. BP made the latest move on Tuesday, saying it will slash spending on assets and investments by as much as $6 billion this year. So, are oil prices going to keep rising? CMC Markets' Michael Houston is skeptical, saying energy companies might have to prepare for prices to drop again.
It's going to have to keep a lid on costs. It's going to have to be very forensic in terms of future capital, capital expenditure, and it's going to have to get used to essentially a much lower average oil price over the next 18 months to 2 years.
Traders also believe U.S. crude inventories will continue to rise while temporary factors like strikes at U.S. refineries affected the 4-day rally in oil prices. Hwang Jie, Arirang News.
Korea's foreign exchange reserves dipped to their lowest level in 8 months in January. The Bank of Korea says the reserves stood at around $362 billion as of the end of last month. That's down almost $1.5 billion. The central bank attributes the fall to the weakening euro and British pound against the greenback. As of the end of December last year, Korea had the 7th largest foreign reserves in the world, following countries such as China, Japan, and Switzerland.
Korea's cosmetic giant Amorepacific posted record earnings last year, with the all-time high figure largely attributed to Chinese customers. That said, it's not just Chinese tourists snapping up the company's products. Local consumers are also big fans. Kim Ji-yeon has the story.
Korea's top cosmetics firm Amorepacific, which owns brands like Seoul and Innisfree, posted its best earnings last year. The firm's sales and operating profits jumped 25% and 52% to more than $3.5 billion and $517 million respectively. The jump is due to the brand's popularity among the 6 million Chinese tourists estimated to have visited the country last year. The company's business operations overseas have also borne fruit, as sales in China increased 44% last year from the previous year. To cater to the rising demand there, the firm is launching a skincare brand Eoh in the Chinese market this year. Meanwhile, its low-end brand Innisfree is expanding into other Asian countries such as Singapore, Malaysia, and Taiwan, as well as the United States. Striking the iron while it's hot, Amorepacific expects a sales increase of 13% this year to more than $4 billion, in addition to a 15% increase in operating profits this year from the previous year to $612 million. Amorepacific's target stock price has been raised by 10% to nearly $3,000 by High Investment and Securities and Dongbu Securities. Amorepacific was founded in 1954 and is currently led by CEO Seoh Kyung-bae. Last year, it merged with one of the country's largest distribution companies, CJ GLS. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
And it turns out that the Volkswagen Golf was the best-selling compact hatchback in Korea in 2014. And this is significant as it marks the first time sales of an imported car have outpaced those of a domestic one in a particular model group. According to local auto industry sources on Wednesday, Volkswagen sold nearly 7,240 units of the Golf last year, up 24% from a year earlier, outstripping its main rival, the Hyundai i30, which posted record low sales of fewer than 6,700 units. Market watchers believe the latest trend is an indication of the growing popularity and availability of imported cars in Korea in recent years.
A Korean man who was kidnapped by militants in the Philippines 2 weeks ago has been released and reunited with his family. Seoul's foreign ministry says the 55-year-old with the family name Yoon, is back at his home in the Philippines after his wife handed over an undisclosed amount of money to his abductors. While driving in Mindanao, which is the Philippines' easternmost island, Mr. Yoon was abducted by armed militants who threatened to kill him if they were not paid a ransom. This is just the latest kidnapping in the Philippines targeting Korean nationals. Last year, 10 Koreans were killed in the country. Time now for a look through the other global headlines. We're following this Wednesday lunchtime from Seoul. For that, we turn to Eunice Kim, standing by at the News Centre.
Now, Eunice, police in Canada have charged 3 men in Ottawa believed to have ties to the group identifying itself as the Islamic State.
That's right, Jin-joo. One was arrested and 2 others charged in absentia, all in their early to mid-20s. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police underlined that they had never posed an immediate threat to the general public, but their investigations had led them to this preemptive move. The chief superintendent of this federal police force, Jennifer Strachan, told a news conference that the charges represented the country's strong resolve to root out terrorist threats. She explained 25-year-old Also Pashdari was arrested on suspicions of running a recruiting cell for IS, as well as giving financial and ideological support to the extremist group. Kadar Khalib and John McGuire, who had before appeared in IS propaganda video, are both known to have traveled to Syria and are believed to be in the region fighting alongside IS. There was Twitter chatter that McGuire had died fighting there, but Canadian authorities said they have yet to confirm that. The UN's highest court has ruled that neither Serbia nor Croatia was guilty of committing genocide during the breakup of Yugoslavia in the 1990s. The presiding judge at the International Court of Justice, Peter Tomka, recognized that fighters from both sides had committed violent acts, but that an intent to commit genocide, that is, to destroy a population in whole or in part, was not present in either country. Serbia had filed a countersuit in 2000 after Croatia filed a genocide lawsuit against it in 1999. Both sides said they were disappointed at the ruling, but expressed hope that it would help the neighboring states turn over a new page. And in what would be a first, UK lawmakers are on course to approve a controversial fertility procedure that would allow doctors to create babies using DNA from 3 separate people. Following 90 minutes of heated debate, MPs at the House of Commons passed a bill on Tuesday, and now it moves on to the House of Lords. UK Health Minister Jane Ellison called the measure a bold but a considered and informed step, but critics say it would enable doctors to cross a fundamental ethical boundary and potentially be a step closer to creating designer babies. The 3-parent in vitro fertilization technique would combine DNA from a female donor with the DNA of mothers with mitochondrial deficiencies to help stop the genetic disease from being passed on to the child.
Good afternoon, I'm Lee Ji-yeon here with your latest weather updates. Today is the beginning of the spring according to the East Asian calendar, but instead of a gentle spring breeze, we have fine dust coming in. The level of fine dust is at a higher level in most parts except for the eastern regions, and that's due to the rain clouds that are dropping showers to snow into the eastern parts of the peninsula. And the skies are covered with lots of clouds, and it should remain mostly to partly cloudy throughout the day, which will make it feel chillier than the actual temperatures. With that in mind, let's take a closer look at the readings for today. Now, the daily high here in Seoul will climb up to 4, while the top temperature in Daegu and Gwangju will peak at 8 and 6, and Busan should rise to 6 this afternoon. Now, let's see how other regions are looking. It looks like Jeju should see a high of 6. Daejeon and Dokdo peak at 5 and 3 respectively, but Mount Keungang remains quite cold. Now, this week should wrap up under mild conditions, but starting Sunday, things will get quite cold again, with the lows expected to plummet to freezing side again here in the capital. That's all for Korea, and here's international weather for viewers around the world.
Well, that does it for this edition of Newsline at Noon.
Jin-joo and I will be back at the same time on Thursday. Until then, goodbye.